One of the biggest unquestioned assumptions about applying to college is whether and why you need to enroll immediately after high school. When students of mine hint at a gap year and parents fiercely resist, which is a common conversation I regularly have, my response is why not? What's the worst that can happen? A gap year can save some money, and your child is 1 year more mature and independent than before. 90% of students who take a gap year eventually enroll in college. Even offering the option of a gap year early on in a student's academic career can alleviate some of the pressures to excel. Offering alternative possibilities will undoubtedly help students establish a sense of control over their lives. When they eventually commit to a course of study or a career, they have greater confidence in their choice. It's honestly hard to see the downsides of taking a year off. For example, prospective MBA students are expected to have a few years of professional experience before applying. Most elite law schools for further applicants have taken at least some time off following the bachelor's degree. Except for accidents of history and a society obsessed with prestigious undergraduate degrees, there are few, if any, compelling reasons for jumping straight into one's undergraduate studies. In most developed countries, including the Netherlands, which is where my wife is from, this standard is reversed. Immediate college enrollment is somewhat outside the norm in most European nations. Gap years can allow teenagers to explore their interest and better understand what they might want to do, or more importantly, eliminate less appealing academic or career possibilities. One benefit of pursuing a gap year specifically abroad is it doesn't have the stigma of remaining in one's hometown or moving elsewhere in the United States. Going abroad guarantees that you'll meet people from different backgrounds, even if it's in an English speaking tourist area or a volunteer program bubble. Still, you would have to try very hard not to have new experiences while you're abroad, whereas it's easier if you stay at home to just kind of coast with your routines. One of my clients in fall 2024 completed a fully funded program called NISLI for the Mandarin Language Immersion Program in Taiwan during the summer after their junior year. Then they gained admission to UT and honors and requested a gap year to complete the fully funded full year program in Taiwan before beginning their UT studies. So they're going to enroll at UT 1 year wiser and with a higher competence in the Mandarin language. Some of the most interesting people that I meet on my travels are the teenagers who had the courage and the parents the willingness to allow them to take a year off between their studies. I met one of my best friends, Jan from Germany, when he was 19 and I was 26, when he was on his gap year in Central America and Mexico. He filmed my first UT Admissions Guy YouTube videos when I visited him in the Netherlands after he'd begun his university business studies. I've even spent time with his family and met his younger brother Luca while he was on his gap year in Southeast Asia. A typical year abroad may cost anywhere from a little bit more than a year at a community college to less than the cost of attending your local public university. One memorable American gap year teenage girl that I met from rural New Hampshire had deferred her Harvard enrollment to study indigenous languages in Mexico. Another was taking a mental health leave of absence from Brown University, and we all met in 2015 in Quetzaltenango, which is Guatemala's western city in the western part of the country, second biggest city, and we all met at the Spanish school PLQE. PLQE provided one of the best educational environments I've ever experienced, and that includes my most rigorous UT Austin honors courses. All of our teachers were local Guatemalans with bachelor's or advanced degrees, and they often worked as engineers, lawyers, or technocrats. PLQE even accommodated parents with young children, retirees, and working professionals, so that means we met a really diverse range of fellow students. Each of us received 5 hours of Spanish instruction one on one, 5 days a week for 25 hours total. And I spent 6 weeks there, and I improved my Spanish from upper elementary, A2, to lower advanced, C1. While I was taking lessons, Guatemala descended into political protests, resulting in the first president in Latin American history, Otto Perez Molina, to step down following a peaceful revolution. Taking advanced classes with lawyers or social activists helped me develop more nuanced views on important issues during those days. And so for around $300 a week, we received 25 hours of instruction, full room and board with a local family. Every afternoon and on the weekends, the school also provided optional field trips, which was covered by our tuition, where we used local transport and we were guided by one of our teachers to places like a women's cooperative, Quiche indigenous villages, rural campesino farms, and sites of natural beauty or historical significance. I even sometimes served as a translator for less experienced students, so that was a pretty cool experience for me. So, Consider, and in contrast, that one semester of tuition at New York University, NYU, is $26,500, and that alone could fund the equivalent of 88 weeks of studying and living at POQE in Quetzaltenango. You could even theoretically live there for 4.5 years for the same price as a full year of NYU tuition and living expenses. One of the things I love most about traveling is that things seem to matter the most back home are almost completely irrelevant abroad. Like, for example, your age, education level, hometown, your material possessions, like what you majored in, where you work, what your SATs were, and so on. And so I love seeking out those people who are curious and conscientious and who make an effort to get to know themselves and the world and to dig a little bit beneath the surface. Saying yes to something is so much easier when you're not worried about how it's going to affect your colleagues or your classmates' perceptions or your college admissions chances. It's also easier to opt out and say no to something that doesn't interest or serve you because you can get out of some of those grids and paths that sometimes students or people of all ages feel stuck in. There isn't a pressure to commit to something out of a misplaced sense of obligation. And so that degree of freedom and autonomy is something you can never find while remaining in the same system that you were born into without ever questioning some of these basic assumptions. People taking gap years can explore their interests and develop their identities away from their parents' prying eyes or their hovering helicopter blades. The biggest complaint from students that do gap years and from my friends like Jan is that they might feel somewhat out of place relative to their less mature and less socially developed classmates when they do eventually enroll in college. Their year or two away helps make them excel in college and strike a more manageable work life balance. Spending time away from one's hometown or country lets you see the bigger picture and acknowledge concerns beyond a narrow worldview. When I followed up with my travel friends who've taken gap years and subsequently applied for and enrolled at their university, they universally reported that it was beneficial to them. And around 3% of Americans who eventually enroll in college do take an intentional gap year, which is honestly frankly higher than I would have expected. Surveys also suggest that students who take a gap year overwhelmingly report that it contributed to personal growth, increased maturity, and self confidence, along with improved communication skills, especially those cross cultural abilities, and it also helped them find their direction in life. I've met people on gap years learning non college skills like permaculture, yoga and meditation, scuba or freediving, kayaking, salsa or other kinds of dancing, conservation, world music, fine art, wilderness survival, storytelling and blogging, and so on. As well, Americans aged 18 to 30 have access to 1 year working holiday visa programs, which allow employment in Australia, Ireland, New Zealand, Singapore, South Korea, and Canada. Working holiday visas allow the holder multiple entries and exits, and they allow them to open a bank account and pursue legal employment. They're entitled to all of the rights, benefits, and protections of residents of that country. I know people from working holidays who've worked on ranches, farms, yoga studios, government agencies, wineries, cafes, you name it. My now wife went to New Zealand for a mid career gap in her late 20s, where we met at a campsite. In college, students who took a gap year tend to have higher grades and even graduate on time relative to their non gap year peers, which also contradicts parental concerns that their child is somehow going to fall behind academically by taking a year off from school. Taking a gap year may diminish the chances of having mental health issues in college that even necessitate a leave of absence. So it's kind of preventative for some of those problems that might arise during the college enrollment time. Gap years also improve retention and graduation rates, and indirectly, gap years improve one's graduate school prospects. Some universities even offer incentives for deferred enrollment. For example, Duke University began a scholarship program to a few dozen students each year to facilitate structured gap year experiences. So when you're doing your college search, ask the admissions offices what their deferment policy is, and maybe if they offer any scholarships that are available to facilitate those gap year programs. Specific to UT, I've never known of a student who's requested a gap year and was not offered it. So UT makes that accessible to its applicants. Even though I'm a big fan of gap years, I don't think that there's something that parents should impose on their child. Just allow and present it as a possibility and offer them space and resources to make the option something that's realistic if it interests to your child. A gap year also shouldn't be a means to an end or an opportunity to bolster your resume for a future or subsequent college admissions cycle. Yet, I believe that a gap year will improve your future admissions chances because you have more experiences to talk about in those essays. Anticipating a gap year early on in high school means you could even forgo applying to college during your senior year entirely. And applying to college after graduating from high school alleviates a lot of that stress and peer pressure because you're not around anxious classmates, you don't have to worry about your senior year schedule, and you're not bombarded with social media posts of everybody who's applying or getting in or not getting into different schools. My advice for a gap year is to leave it semi-structured or even entirely unstructured. Like you could just buy a one-way plane ticket somewhere, book a week's accommodation at a hostel and just figure it out. Because anyone that's done their own open-ended travels at any age will know that you're almost immediately going to meet other people who are on the road and taking similar journeys. You don't stay lonely or alone or without direction for long. But I also understand that tolerance for adventure is probably not palatable to even the most open-minded families. Instead, it may help to plan a month or two of volunteering or attending a language school like I did at PLQE. I'm not naive enough to think that some parents, including mine, would ever permit their child to gallivant around the world for a year without a plan, but still, I don't recommend paying for some expensive gap year program that structures an entire year down to the hour. Some of these paid for gap year programs are better than others, and there are even gap year fairs to connect with these programs, like, for example, gooversea.com. Most programs, though, are quite expensive, and there's even consulting firms that will charge hefty fees to, Google what you could otherwise find yourself. One family recently reported excellent experiences with the Winterline Global Skills Program, which teaches life and survival skills over a 9 to 10 month period. However, as with anything, it's important to research your options and become an informed consumer. NYU professor Scott Galloway calls for gap years to become the norm and not the exception. It helps prepare children for the future. He laments, quote, "An increasingly ugly secret of campus life is that a mix of helicopter parenting and social media has rendered many 18-year-olds unfit for college." Close quote. Many students at elite universities, including UT, haven't been permitted to develop these soft skills, or the autonomy of thought, or the overall maturity required for thriving on college campuses. Even if you do decide to enroll in college immediately after high school, at least entertain the thought of delaying enrollment or applying rather than defaulting to what everyone else is doing. I hope you've enjoyed this video and received some food for thought about a less conventional approach to your college and academic and career and life journey. The easiest way to reach me is by email at kevin@texasadmissions.com, and to complete the questionnaire in the information section of this video for a free email admissions consultation. Thanks, and I hope you have a great day.